My name is Rebecca Torres, and for 23 years, I thought I knew what family meant. I was wrong, dead wrong, and when my husband Marcus died in that horrific construction accident last March, I discovered just how quickly the people you trust most can transform into vultures circling fresh carrion. But here's the thing about underestimating a grieving widow: sometimes we bite back harder than anyone expects. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of Marcus's funeral, I woke up in our bedroom in Riverside, California, staring at his empty side of the bed. The California sunshine streaming through our curtains felt like an insult. How dare the world continue being beautiful when mine had just shattered into a million pieces? Marcus Torres had been my everything since we met at UC San Diego 25 years ago. He was this brilliant civil engineer with calloused hands and dreams bigger than the skyscrapers he helped design. We built our life together from nothing, literally nothing. When we got married, we had $17 between us and a beat-up Honda Civic that Marcus had to jump-start with a screwdriver. But Marcus was one of those rare people who could turn dreams into reality through sheer determination. He started Torres Construction Solutions in our garage, working 18-hour days, bidding on small residential projects while I worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse to keep us afloat. Those early years were brutal, but we had each other, and somehow that felt like enough. The business grew slowly at first, then rapidly. Marcus had this gift for seeing potential where others saw problems. He could look at a crumbling foundation and envision a magnificent structure. By the time he died, Torres Construction Solutions employed over 200 people and had contracts worth millions of dollars across Southern California. We never had children, not by choice, but because life had other plans. After years of trying and heartbreak, we poured all that parental love into the business, treating our employees like family. Marcus always said the company was our baby, and in many ways it was. But families, as I was about to learn, can be more complicated than I ever imagined. The funeral was held at St. Catherine's Catholic Church in downtown Riverside. The pews were packed with construction workers in their best suits, business partners, city officials, and what felt like half the community. Marcus had touched so many lives, built so many dreams into reality. As I sat in the front row, wearing the black dress he'd always said made me look elegant, I felt oddly comforted by the sea of faces behind me. That comfort didn't last long. The first sign of trouble came during the reception at the Riverside Convention Center. Marcus's older brother, Vincent Torres, approached me with his wife Linda and their twin sons, Cameron and Derek. Vincent had always been the family politician, smooth-talking, well-dressed, with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Rebecca, honey," Vincent said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, "we need to talk about the business." I was still in shock, operating on autopilot, so I just nodded. We found a quiet corner away from the crowd of mourners. "Now I know this is difficult timing," Vincent continued, "but Marcus would want us to act quickly to protect what he built. The company needs strong leadership, and frankly, you've never been involved in the day-to-day operations." Linda, a sharp-faced woman who'd never liked me much, chimed in. "Vincent has 20 years of experience in commercial real estate. He understands construction and business. It's what Marcus would have wanted." I stared at them, my grief-addled brain struggling to process what they were suggesting. "Are you saying I should step aside?" "Not step aside," Vincent said smoothly. "Step back. Let the family handle things while you grieve properly. You deserve time to heal without the stress of running a company." Cameron, the older twin by 12 minutes and a carbon copy of his father's political ambitions, leaned forward. "Aunt Rebecca, we're just thinking about what's best for everyone. The employees, the clients, the Torres family legacy." Derek nodded agreement, though he had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable about the whole conversation. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach, but I was too exhausted to fight. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," Vincent said, that plastic smile never wavering. "Take all the time you need. But remember, the business world doesn't stop for grief. Clients are already asking questions, wondering about continuity. We need to show strength, stability. Over the next few days, as I tried to navigate the impossible landscape of life without Marcus, the pressure intensified. Vincent and Linda showed up at my house daily, always with the same message: I wasn't capable of running the business, I didn't understand construction, I was too emotional to make sound decisions. They brought charts and graphs showing how the company's stock price was fluctuating, how clients were expressing concerns. They had lawyers draw up papers that would make Vincent the CEO, while giving me a generous settlement and a seat on the board of directors, essentially making me a silent partner in my own husband's company. It's really the most sensible solution, Linda explained over coffee in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus and I had planned our future together. You'll be financially secure, but you won't have the burden of actually running things. The word burden hit me like a slap. Marcus's life's work, our shared dream, was being dismissed as a burden, but I was still reeling from loss, still unable to think clearly. When you're drowning in grief, sometimes you grab onto whatever life preserver is thrown your way, even if it's attached to an anchor. The lawyers' meeting was held at the offices of Rodriguez, Martinez and Associates, a prestigious firm in downtown Los Angeles that Vincent had somehow arranged within a week of Marcus's death. The speed should have been my first red flag, but I was operating in a fog of sadness and antidepressants. Vincent's attorney, a sleek woman named Patricia Hendricks, spread the documents across the mahogany conference table like she was dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. The papers were thick, dense with legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all I understood. "This is really quite generous," Patricia explained, pointing to various clauses with her gold-plated pen. "Mrs. Torres will receive a settlement of $2.8 million, plus a monthly stipend of $8,000 for life, plus full medical benefits. In exchange, she transfers operational control of Torres Construction Solutions to Vincent Torres, while retaining a 20% ownership stake. 20% of the company my husband had built from nothing. The company we had sacrificed everything for, lived and breathed together for over 2 decades. What about the employees?" I asked. It was the first time I'd spoken during the entire meeting. Vincent leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Rebecca, you have my word that I'll take care of everyone. These people are family to us too." Family, that word again. I signed the papers. 3 months later, I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The first sign came when Janet Morrison, Marcus's longtime secretary and my friend for 15 years, called me crying. Vincent had fired her, claiming the company needed to streamline operations and eliminate redundant positions. "Rebecca, I don't understand," Janet sobbed over the phone. "I've been with the company since the beginning. Marcus always said I was part of the family." Vincent gave me 2 weeks severance and told me to clean out my desk immediately. More calls followed. Tom Rodriguez, the foreman who'd helped Marcus build his first major project, gone. Sarah Chen, the project manager who'd graduated from Caltech and had been Marcus's protege, gone. David Washington, the safety inspector who'd prevented countless accidents over the years, gone. Vincent wasn't streamlining, he was purging. Anyone who had been loyal to Marcus, anyone who might question his methods or remember how things used to be done, was being systematically eliminated. I tried calling Vincent to discuss it, but suddenly he was always in meetings, always traveling, always too busy to take my calls. Linda would answer instead, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, Rebecca, I'm sure Vincent knows what he's doing. Business is so complicated, you know. Maybe it's better if you don't worry yourself with these details." The second sign came when I drove past the company headquarters in downtown Riverside. The building Marcus had been so proud of, with its glass facade and the Torres Construction Solutions logo he'd designed himself, now had a different sign: VT Development Corporation. VT. Vincent Torres, my husband's name, our name, had been erased. I sat in my car across the street, staring at that building, feeling something shift inside me. The fog of grief was finally lifting, and underneath it was something harder, sharper: anger. That night, I did something I should have done months earlier. I read every single page of the contract I'd signed, every clause, every subsection, every piece of fine print. What I found made my blood run cold. Buried in the legal language was a clause that essentially gave Vincent the right to make any operational changes deemed necessary for the continued success of the business. This included renaming the company, restructuring departments, and here was the kicker, relocating the headquarters. VT Development Corporation wasn't just a name change. Vincent was moving the entire operation to Arizona, where his wife's family had connections, and where labor was cheaper. He was taking everything Marcus had built and transplanting it to a different state, cutting ties with the community that had supported us for decades. But the worst part was still to come. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I hired my own attorney, a fierce woman named Gloria Santos, who specialized in corporate law. It took her exactly 3 days to uncover what Vincent had been hiding. "Rebecca," Gloria said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "this contract you signed is essentially worthless. Vincent has been using a series of shell companies and accounting tricks to siphon money out of Torres Construction Solutions before transferring the assets to his new company in Arizona. The 20% ownership stake you retained, it's 20% of nothing." The room spun around me. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean, he's been systematically draining the company's assets. Equipment has been sold to VT Development at below market prices. Intellectual property has been licensed to the Arizona company for nominal fees. The California company that you technically own 20% of will be bankrupt within 6 months, while the Arizona company, which you have no stake in, will own all the real assets." It was theft, plain and simple. Legal theft, but theft nonetheless. "Can we stop it?" I asked. Gloria's expression was grim. "We can try, but Vincent's lawyers are good. They've structured this carefully to stay just within the bounds of legality. Fighting it will take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, with no guarantee of success." That night, I sat in the house Marcus and I had shared, surrounded by pictures of our life together, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Vincent hadn't just stolen the company. He'd stolen Marcus's legacy, betrayed the employees who'd trusted us, and made a mockery of everything we'd built together. But then I remembered something Marcus used to say when we faced impossible odds in the early days. "Rebecca, when someone pushes you into a corner, you have 2 choices. You can curl up and die, or you can come out swinging." I wasn't ready to curl up and die. The next morning, I drove to the storage unit where we kept Marcus's old files from the early days of the company. If Vincent thought he could erase 23 years of history, he was about to learn otherwise. Those boxes contained contracts, correspondence, financial records, and most importantly, documentation of every shady deal, every corner cut, every questionable decision that had been made over the years. Marcus had been an honest man, but the construction business attracts all types, and over the years, we'd encountered our share of corrupt contractors, bribed inspectors, and under-the-table deals. Marcus had always insisted on keeping detailed records of everything, partly for legal protection, and partly because he had an engineer's mind that loved documentation. "Knowledge is power," he used to say, but documented knowledge is a weapon. As I sorted through boxes of files, I began to see the outline of my gift to Vincent and his family. It wasn't going to be pretty, and it wasn't going to be kind, but it was going to be exactly what they deserved. 3 weeks later, I was ready to leave California. I'd sold the house, donated most of our furniture to charity, and packed my remaining belongings into a moving truck. My destination was Portland, Oregon, where my sister Michelle lived, and where I could start over somewhere Vincent Torres would never think to look for me. But before I left, I had one final task to complete. The gift I had prepared for Vincent Torres wasn't wrapped in pretty paper with a bow. It was contained in 3 manila envelopes, each one addressed to a different recipient, each one containing enough information to destroy everything Vincent had stolen from me. The first envelope was addressed to Special Agent Catherine Mills at the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division in Los Angeles. Inside were photocopies of documents dating back 12 years, detailing an elaborate kickback scheme involving city contracts and a company called Sunshine Materials Supply. Here's what Vincent didn't know. Back in 2013, when Torres Construction Solutions was bidding on the massive Riverside Community Center project, Marcus had discovered that the bidding process was rigged. A city councilman named Robert Kellner was taking bribes from Sunshine Materials to ensure they got the concrete supply contract for all major municipal projects, regardless of whether their bids were competitive. Marcus had been furious. He'd wanted to go to the authorities immediately, but I'd talked him out of it. "We need this contract to survive," I'd argued. "If we blow the whistle now, we'll be blacklisted from every city project for the next decade." So Marcus had made a deal with the devil. He'd agreed to use Sunshine Materials for the community center project, and in exchange, Kellner had made sure we got the contract. But Marcus, being Marcus, had documented everything. Every conversation, every inflated invoice, every suspicious payment. What made this particularly damaging was that Vincent had been the one who actually negotiated the deal with Kellner. Marcus had been uncomfortable with the whole arrangement, so he delegated the dirty work to his brother. Vincent had personally delivered the first bribe payment, $25,000 in cash, to Kellner's campaign fund. The beautiful part was that Vincent had been so arrogant, so confident in his own cleverness, that he'd continued using Sunshine Materials for VT development projects in Arizona. The FBI would find an unbroken trail of corruption stretching from California to Arizona, with Vincent Torres at the center of it all. The second envelope was addressed to Jennifer Walsh at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. This one contained documentation of Vincent's creative accounting practices, the shell companies, the asset transfers, the elaborate tax avoidance schemes he'd been using to hide money from both the IRS and me. But the real bombshell in this envelope was something Vincent had no idea I'd discovered. Linda Torres, his beloved wife, had been running her own little side business for the past 5 years. She'd been using Torres Construction Solutions vendor accounts to purchase high-end fixtures and materials, then reselling them through her interior design company, Elegant Spaces, at a massive markup. On paper, it looked like Torres Construction was paying market rate for materials. In reality, Linda was buying items at wholesale prices through our accounts, marking them up 300 to 400%, and then billing her interior design clients full retail plus her design fee. It was a classic fraud scheme, and she'd been hiding the profits in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I discovered this completely by accident while going through Marcus's files. He'd been investigating some discrepancies in material costs and had hired a private investigator to look into it. The investigator's report, dated just 2 weeks before Marcus's death, laid out the entire scheme in detail. Marcus had never had the chance to confront Linda about it. The third envelope was the most devastating of all. This one was addressed to Arizona State Attorney General Patricia Reeves, and it contained information about Vincent's new business practices in Arizona. Remember how Vincent had fired all of Marcus's loyal employees? Well, he hadn't just fired them. He'd replaced them with workers who were willing to cut corners in ways that would make your hair stand on end. The new VT Development Corporation was using substandard materials, ignoring safety protocols, and bribing inspectors to overlook building code violations. I'd learned about this through Sarah Chen, the project manager Vincent had fired. Sarah had landed a job with a competing construction company in Phoenix, and she'd been horrified by what she was seeing on VT development job sites. "Rebecca, you wouldn't believe what they're doing," Sarah had told me during a phone call 3 weeks before I left California. "They're using recycled steel that doesn't meet earthquake standards. They're installing electrical systems that are barely legal, and some that aren't legal at all. I've seen workers operating heavy machinery without proper certification. It's only a matter of time before someone gets killed." But Sarah had also given me something even more valuable, the name of a safety inspector named Miguel Herrera, who'd been pressured by Vincent to sign off on unsafe work. Miguel had refused and had been recording his conversations with VT development supervisors on his phone. I'd contacted Miguel directly, and he'd been eager to talk. Vincent's people had threatened his job, his family, even his immigration status, trying to force him to approve work that he knew was dangerous. Miguel had been keeping detailed records of every violation, every threat, every attempt at bribery. The recordings Miguel had made were damning. Vincent's voice, clear as day, offered him $5,000 to forget about some missing fire safety equipment in an apartment complex that was scheduled to house low-income families. "Listen, Miguel," Vincent's voice said on the recording, "we're all trying to make a living here. These people don't need gold-plated fire systems, they need affordable housing. You help us out on this, and there's more work coming your way. You make trouble, and I guarantee you'll never work in this state again." Miguel had refused, and Vincent had made good on his threat. Miguel had been fired the next day on trumped-up charges, but he'd kept the recordings, and now they were part of my gift to Vincent. The beauty of these 3 envelopes was that they weren't just separate problems, they were interconnected. The FBI investigation would uncover the tax evasion, the IRS investigation would reveal the safety violations, the state attorney general's office would find the federal crimes. Vincent had created a house of cards, and I was about to blow it down, but I wasn't finished yet. The 4th part of my gift wasn't in an envelope. It was a phone call I made to Amanda Richardson, an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times who'd been following corruption in the construction industry for years. Amanda had actually interviewed Marcus several times over the years about industry practices, and she'd always been fair and thorough in her reporting. "Amanda, this is Rebecca Torres," I said when she answered her phone. "Marcus Torres's widow. I have a story for you that's going to make your career." Amanda was skeptical at first. She'd probably gotten hundreds of calls from disgruntled former employees and bitter ex-spouses claiming to have explosive information. But when I started describing what I had, her tone changed quickly. "How much documentation are we talking about?" she asked. 12 years worth of financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of safety violations, email correspondence between Vincent Torres and city officials. "I'm talking about enough evidence to put multiple people in federal prison." "Can you prove all of this?" "Every single allegation I'm making can be backed up with documentation. I'm not interested in a he said, she said story. I want to destroy these people with facts." Amanda agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in downtown Los Angeles the next morning. I brought copies of everything, not the originals, which were already on their way to the FBI, IRS, and State Attorney General, but complete photocopies of the most damaging documents. Amanda's eyes got wider as she flipped through the pages. This is unbelievable. How long has this been going on?" "The corruption started small, probably around 2010. But it's escalated dramatically since Vincent took control of the company. He's gotten greedy and sloppy." "What do you want from this, Rebecca? Are you looking for money? Revenge?" I considered the question carefully. "I want justice. I want the people who trusted Marcus's company to know that their buildings are safe. I want the workers who got fired for doing the right thing to be vindicated. And yes, I want Vincent Torres to pay for what he's done." Amanda spent 3 hours going through the documents with me, asking questions, verifying details, making sure she understood the full scope of the story. By the time we finished, she was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is going to be a multi-part series," she said. "Front page, above the fold. When can I start making calls to verify these claims?" "Give me 48 hours to get out of California," I said. "After that, go wild." That night, I had dinner at Antonino's, the little Italian restaurant where Marcus and I had celebrated every anniversary. I ordered his favorite dish, osso buco with risotto, and raised a glass of Chianti to his memory. "This one's for you, baby," I whispered. The next morning, I loaded my car with the last of my personal belongings and started driving north toward Oregon. As I crossed the California state line, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. My phone started ringing around noon. It was Gloria Santos, my attorney. "Rebecca, where are you right now?" "About 2 hours south of Portland." "Why?" "Vincent Torres just called my office in a panic. Apparently, FBI agents showed up at his Arizona office this morning with search warrants. They've seized his computers, his financial records, everything. He wants to know if you had anything to do with it." I smiled. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that my client has no comment, and that all future communications should go through his attorney." "Perfect." Gloria's voice was amused. "Rebecca, what exactly did you do?" "I gave Vincent a going-away present. Let's leave it at that." The next call came from Amanda Richardson. "Rebecca, holy shit, sorry for the language, but this story is exploding. The FBI just confirmed they're investigating VT Development Corporation for multiple federal crimes. The IRS has frozen Linda Torres's offshore accounts, and the Arizona Attorney General's office just announced they're launching a criminal investigation into safety violations on VT development projects." That was fast. It gets better. Vincent Torres tried to call me this morning, claiming he's being framed by a disgruntled former business partner. When I told him I had recorded conversations of him bribing safety inspectors, he hung up on me. I laughed out loud. What's the timeline for your story? First article runs tomorrow morning. I'm calling it House of Cards: How a Grieving Widow Exposed a Construction Empire Built on Corruption. Is that okay with you? It's perfect. The third call came from Sarah Chen. She was crying, but this time they were tears of joy. Rebecca, I can't believe what you've done. Miguel just called me, the Arizona Attorney General's office, wants him to testify about the safety violations. They're promising him full whistleblower protection and his job back with back pay. You've saved his career, maybe his life. What about the other employees Vincent fired? That's the best part. The FBI investigation has uncovered evidence that Vincent was systematically firing anyone who might expose his crimes. They're calling it witness intimidation. All of us are being contacted as potential victims of federal crimes. That evening, I checked into a hotel in Portland and turned on the local news. The story had already gone national. Vincent Torres's photograph filled the screen as the anchor described the massive corruption scandal rocking the construction industry in 2 states. The reporter was standing outside VT Development Corporation's headquarters in Phoenix, where FBI agents were carrying boxes of evidence out to their vehicles. Vincent Torres, the CEO of VT Development Corporation, has not responded to requests for comment. However, sources close to the investigation tell us that charges could be filed as early as next week. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I'd brought from California, a 2018 Napa Valley Cabernet, that Marcus and I had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You destroyed my family. I hope you're happy. I recognized the writing style immediately. Vincent had always been dramatic. I typed back, you destroyed your own family the moment you decided to steal from a grieving widow. I just made sure the world knew about it. His response came quickly. This isn't over. I smiled as I typed my final message. You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning. Check tomorrow's LA Times. Then I blocked his number, turned off my phone, and settled in to watch the evening news. The story was the lead item on every major network, and it was beautiful to watch. 2 weeks after arriving in Portland, I was sitting in my sister Michelle's kitchen reading the morning news on my laptop when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a black sedan with government plates parked in the driveway. Rebecca Torres. The woman at the door was tall, professional, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. I'm Special Agent Catherine Mills, FBI. We need to talk. I'd been expecting this visit. When you hand the federal government enough evidence to take down a criminal enterprise, they want to verify every detail personally. I invited Agent Mills in and offered her coffee, which she accepted. You've caused quite a stir, she said, settling into Michelle's dining room chair with a thick manila folder. The Vincent Torres investigation has expanded into something we never expected. How so? Agent Mills opened her folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed various construction sites, office buildings, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. Your documentation led us to examine Torres Construction Solutions' entire business history. What we found goes back much further than the Sunshine Materials kickback scheme. She pointed to one of the photographs, showing a partially constructed office building. This is the Riverside Medical Plaza, built by your husband's company in 2009. Do you remember this project? I did remember it. Marcus had been excited about the Medical Plaza contract. It was one of the first major commercial projects that had really established Torres Construction Solutions as a serious player in the industry. Your brother-in-law Vincent was the project supervisor, Agent Mills continued. We've discovered that he was skimming money from material purchases and using substandard concrete in the foundation. The building is structurally unsound. My blood ran cold. Are people in danger? The building houses 2 medical clinics, a physical therapy center, and a dental practice. We evacuated it yesterday morning. Engineers estimate it could have collapsed within the next 2 years, maybe sooner if there had been a significant earthquake. The room spun around me. Vincent's corruption wasn't just about money, it was about lives. Real people, sick people who trusted that the building they entered for medical care was safe. Agent Mills wasn't finished. We've identified 7 other structures built by Torres Construction Solutions between 2008 and 2015, where Vincent was involved in the construction process. All of them show similar issues: substandard materials, corner cutting, safety violations that were covered up through bribery. She showed me more photographs: an elementary school in San Bernardino, a senior living facility in Palm Springs, a low-income housing complex in Riverside. All of them had been compromised by Vincent's greed. The good news is that we caught this before anyone was seriously hurt. The bad news is that Vincent Torres is looking at federal charges that could put him away for 30 years or more. Conspiracy, fraud, bribery, racketeering, and now we're adding endangerment charges. What about Linda and the twins? Linda Torres is facing her own set of charges related to money laundering and tax evasion. The offshore accounts you helped us find contained over $3.2 million in hidden assets. As for Cameron and Derek, they claim they had no knowledge of their parents' activities, and so far we haven't found evidence to contradict that. Agent Mills leaned forward. Here's what I need from you, Rebecca. We want Vincent Torres to cooperate with our investigation. There are other players in this corruption network: city officials, inspectors, material suppliers, and Vincent has information that could help us roll up the entire operation. But he's not talking. What does that have to do with me? You knew him for over 20 years. You understand how he thinks, what motivates him. We want you to make a phone call. I stared at her. You want me to help Vincent Torres? We want you to help us get justice for everyone he's hurt. If Vincent cooperates, provides us with information about his co-conspirators, we might be willing to recommend a reduced sentence. If he doesn't cooperate, he'll go to trial on all charges and likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison. It was a devil's bargain, but I understood the logic. Vincent was a small fish compared to the city officials and suppliers who had enabled his corruption for years. Getting them would prevent future victims. What would I say to him? Agent Mills smiled grimly. Tell him the truth. Tell him that his choice is between 15 years in federal prison or 30 years. Tell him that Linda is facing her own charges, and that Cameron and Derek are going to watch both their parents go to jail unless he starts talking. 3 days later, I found myself in a secure conference room at the FBI field office in Portland, staring at a phone that would connect me to Vincent Torres in federal custody in Arizona. Agent Mills sat across from me, along with 2 other agents and a prosecutor from the Department of Justice. The phone rang twice before Vincent answered. Rebecca. His voice was different now, smaller, deflated. Gone was the smooth politician's tone I'd known for decades. I suppose you're enjoying this. I'm not enjoying anything about this situation, Vincent. People could have died because of what you did. What did I did? I built buildings, Rebecca. I created jobs. I made money for everyone involved. You cut corners that could have killed children, Vincent. The elementary school in San Bernardino? The concrete in the foundation is so weak it's basically sand. If there had been an earthquake, that building would have panicked with 500 kids inside. There was silence on the line for almost 30 seconds. The FBI wants you to cooperate, I continued. They want you to tell them about Robert Kellner, about the other city officials you bribed, about the inspection company that rubber-stamped your work. And if I don't, then you'll go to trial on all charges: conspiracy, racketeering, bribery, fraud, tax evasion, and now criminal endangerment. The prosecutor thinks you're looking at life in prison. Another long silence. What about Linda? What about my boys? Linda is facing her own charges, but if you cooperate, the government might be willing to work with her attorney. As for Cameron and Derek, they're adults. They'll have to live with having parents in federal prison, but at least they won't be visiting you in a maximum security facility for the next 40 years. Vincent's voice cracked. How did it come to this, Rebecca? We used to be family. We stopped being family the moment you decided to steal Marcus's life work and leave me with nothing. But this isn't about revenge anymore, Vincent. This is about preventing other families from losing their loved ones, because you were too greedy to use proper concrete. If I cooperate, what kind of deal are they offering? I looked at Agent Mills, who nodded. 15 years, minimum security facility, and they'll recommend that Linda get probation instead of prison time. I need to think about it. Vincent, listen to me carefully. The government doesn't need your cooperation to convict you. They have your voice on tape bribing Miguel Herrera. They have bank records showing the kickback payments. They have structural engineers who will testify that your buildings are death traps. You're going to prison, either way. The only question is whether you're going to help make sure this doesn't happen to other people. The call ended without Vincent giving an answer. But Agent Mills seemed satisfied. He'll cooperate, she said. Men like Vincent Torres always cooperate when they realize they're going to lose everything anyway. She was right. 2 days later, Vincent's attorney called the prosecutor to discuss a plea agreement. Meanwhile, Amanda Richardson's investigative series had exploded into a national story. Other reporters were digging into construction corruption in cities across the country. 3 more FBI field offices had opened investigations based on information that had come to light from the Torres case. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Janet Morrison, Marcus's former secretary. "Rebecca, you'll never believe what happened," Janet said, her voice filled with excitement. "The FBI contacted me as part of their victim restitution program. They're saying that Vincent's theft of the company assets means all the employees he fired are entitled to compensation." "That's wonderful, Janet. It gets better. There's a construction company in San Diego that's been following the news coverage. They're owned by Maria Gonzalez. Do you remember her? She used to work for Marcus as a junior engineer back in the early days." I did remember Maria. She was brilliant, ambitious, and had left Torres Construction Solutions about 8 years earlier to start her own firm. "Maria called me yesterday," Janet continued. "She wants to hire back everyone Vincent fired. She's getting ready to bid on some major projects, and she says she needs people with integrity, people who won't cut corners. She specifically mentioned that anyone who worked for Marcus Torres has a reputation for doing things the right way." It was poetic justice. Marcus's former employees, the people who had been punished for their loyalty and honesty, were going to rebuild their careers with someone who shared Marcus's values. 3 months later, I was back in California for Vincent's sentencing hearing. The federal courthouse in Los Angeles was packed with reporters, former employees and victims of Vincent's crimes. Vincent looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since Marcus's funeral. His expensive suits had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair was unkempt, and his hands shook as he stood before the judge. Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to Sarah Chen, was known for her tough sentences in white-collar crime cases. She'd reviewed all the evidence, heard testimony from victims, and listened to Vincent's allocution where he'd finally admitted to years of fraud and corruption. "Torres," Judge Chen said, "your crimes weren't committed in a moment of desperation or poor judgment. This was a systematic pattern of corruption that spanned more than a decade. You betrayed the trust of your community, endangered the lives of countless innocent people, and destroyed a company that your brother spent his life building." Vincent's attorney had argued for the minimum sentence under the plea agreement, but Judge Chen wasn't interested in mercy. "While I acknowledge your cooperation with federal investigators, I cannot ignore the scope and severity of your crimes. You are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also pay full restitution to victims, which the government estimates at approximately $12 million. Linda Torres, who had been sitting in the gallery, broke down sobbing. Cameron and Derek sat stone-faced, probably calculating how old they'd be when their father got out of prison. As Vincent was led away in handcuffs, he looked directly at me for the first time since Marcus's funeral. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just resignation and something that might have been regret. After the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps with Gloria Santos and Agent Mills, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. "How do you feel?" Gloria asked. "Tired," I said honestly, "but satisfied." Marcus always said that actions have consequences. It just took a while for Vincent's consequences to catch up with him. Agent Mills shook my hand. "What you did took courage, Rebecca. A lot of people would have just taken the money and stayed quiet. A lot of people didn't spend 23 years married to Marcus Torres. He taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." That evening I drove past the old Torres Construction Solutions headquarters in Riverside. The building was empty now, with a for lease sign in the window. But there was something else that made me smile. Across the street, in a smaller building that used to house an accounting firm, There was a new sign, Gonzalez Construction Solutions, built on integrity. Maria had not only hired back Marcus's former employees, she'd also chosen to locate her expanding California office directly across from where Torres Construction Solutions used to be. It felt like a torch being passed, a legacy being honored. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen. "Rebecca, thought you'd want to know, Miguel Herrera just got promoted to Chief Safety Inspector for the city of Phoenix. His first official act was to implement new protocols that require multiple inspectors to sign off on any major structural work. They're calling them the Torres Protocols, in honor of Marcus's commitment to safety." I sat in my rental car, looking up at the California sky that had seemed so insulting on the morning of Marcus's funeral, and realized it looked beautiful again. Somewhere, somehow, I felt like Marcus was smiling. 1 year after Vincent's sentencing, I was standing in the lobby of Portland General Hospital, wearing scrubs for the first time in over 2 decades. After everything that had happened, I'd decided to return to nursing, the career I'd abandoned to help Marcus build his construction empire. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 23 years helping build structures, and now I was back to helping heal people. But in a strange way, it felt like coming home. Rebecca Torres, a young doctor, approached me, checking his clipboard. "I'm Dr. James Patterson. I'll be showing you around the cardiac unit today." As we walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Patterson explained the changes in medical technology since I'd last worked as a nurse. Digital records, new monitoring equipment, advanced surgical procedures. The medical field had evolved dramatically, but the core mission remained the same, caring for people when they needed it most. "Your resume is interesting, Doctor," Patterson said as we entered the break room. 23 years in business, then back to nursing. What made you decide to return? How do you explain a story like mine? How do you tell someone that you'd spent the last year bringing down a criminal conspiracy, and now just wanted to do something that mattered? "Life took an unexpected turn," I said simply. "I realized I wanted to spend my remaining years helping people instead of building things." What I didn't tell Dr. Patterson was that I'd been having dreams about Marcus. Not nightmares, peaceful dreams where we'd sit together in our old kitchen, and he'd tell me how proud he was of what I'd done. In the most recent dream, he'd said something that had stuck with me. "Rebecca, you've torn down the bad thing I accidentally built. Now go build something good." 3 months into my new job, I received an unexpected visitor. Janet Morrison appeared in the hospital lobby one Tuesday afternoon, looking nervous but determined. "Rebecca, I hope you don't mind me tracking you down like this. Maria Gonzalez gave me your contact information." Janet looked healthier than she had in years. The stress lines around her eyes had faded, and she was wearing a business suit that suggested things were going well at her new job. "I have something for you," Janet said, pulling a small wooden box from her purse. When the FBI finished their investigation and released Marcus's personal effects from the office, I asked if I could have this. "I thought you should have it." Inside the box was Marcus's original business license from 1998, the one he'd framed and hung in our first tiny office above the hardware store. Underneath it was a photograph I'd never seen before. Marcus and me at the groundbreaking ceremony for our first major project, both of us covered in dirt and grinning like idiots. "He kept this on his desk," Janet said, quietly. "Even after the company got big, and he had that fancy corner office, this picture never moved. He said it reminded him why he started the business." I felt tears welling up, but they weren't the bitter tears of grief I'd been crying for months. These were different, grateful somehow, peaceful. "Thank you, Janet. This means everything to me." "There's something else," Janet said. "Maria wants to establish a Marcus Torres Memorial Scholarship Fund for students studying construction engineering and safety. She's asked all of Marcus's former employees to contribute, and we've already raised over $50,000. We were hoping you might want to be involved." The scholarship fund became my new project. Working with Maria and the former Torres construction employees, we created a program that would send 2 students per year to study construction engineering, with a focus on building safety and ethical business practices. The first scholarship recipients were announced 6 months later. One was a young woman named Isabella Rodriguez, whose father had been killed in a construction accident caused by unsafe working conditions. The other was David Chen, Sarah's nephew, who wanted to follow in his aunt's footsteps as a project manager. At the scholarship ceremony, held in the renovated community center that Marcus had built honestly all those years ago, Isabella Rodriguez gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Construction work should never be about cutting corners or saving money at the expense of human lives, she said. The Marcus Torres Memorial Scholarship represents a commitment to building things the right way, even when it's harder, even when it costs more, because people's lives depend on it. After the ceremony, Maria Gonzalez pulled me aside. Rebecca, I have a proposition for you. Gonzalez Construction Solutions is growing faster than I ever imagined. We're getting contracts from companies that specifically want to work with us because of our reputation for integrity. I need someone to help oversee our safety and quality control programs. Maria, I'm a nurse now. I don't know anything about running construction programs. You know more than you think. You spent 20 years watching Marcus build a company based on doing things the right way. And more importantly, you had the courage to expose Vincent when he betrayed those principles. That's exactly the kind of integrity I need. The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready to leave nursing behind again. We compromised. I would serve as a consultant to Gonzalez Construction Solutions, helping develop safety protocols and ethical guidelines while maintaining my work at the hospital. 2 years after Vincent's sentencing, the construction industry had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Torres protocols that Miguel Herrera had implemented in Phoenix had been adopted by cities across the country. Construction companies were advertising their commitment to safety and transparency. The fear of becoming the next Vincent Torres had created a culture of accountability that Marcus would have been proud of. But the most satisfying change was personal. I'd learned to be happy again. It started small, enjoying my morning coffee, appreciating a beautiful sunset, laughing at a colleague's joke. Gradually, the weight of grief and anger that had consumed me for so long began to lift. I wasn't the same person I'd been when Marcus was alive, but I was someone he would have recognized and loved. On the 3rd anniversary of Marcus's death, I drove back to Riverside for the first time since Vincent's sentencing. The old Torres Construction Solutions building had been renovated and now housed a nonprofit organization that provided job training for disadvantaged youth. I visited Marcus's grave at Riverside Memorial Gardens, bringing fresh flowers and the original business license that Janet had saved for me. "Hey baby," I said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his headstone. "I thought you'd want to know how everything turned out." I told him about Vincent serving his time in federal prison, about Linda working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm to pay off her restitution debts. I told him about Cameron and Derek, who had both changed their last names and moved to different states to escape their parents' infamy. But mostly, I told him about the good things. About Maria's company thriving while maintaining the ethical standards he'd believed in. About the scholarship fund that was sending young engineers to school. About the safety protocols that were preventing accidents across the country. "Vincent thought he was stealing your legacy," I said, "but he couldn't steal what really mattered. Your integrity, your commitment to doing things right, your belief that work should make the world better, that's what lives on." As I prepared to leave, I noticed a young couple at a nearby grave, holding hands and crying softly. The woman was pregnant, and they both looked devastated by whatever loss had brought them there. I walked over to them. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said gently. The man looked up, his eyes red with tears. "Thank you. We lost my father last month. Construction accident. He was working on a building where the safety protocols weren't being followed." My heart clenched. "I'm so sorry." The woman squeezed her husband's hand. "We're trying to decide whether to sue the construction company. Everyone says we should, but it won't bring him back." I thought about Marcus, about Vincent, about all the families whose lives had been destroyed by greed and corruption. "Sometimes fighting isn't about getting someone back," I said. "Sometimes it's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." 6 months later, I received a letter from that young couple. They had sued the construction company and discovered a pattern of safety violations similar to what Vincent had been doing. Their lawsuit had led to a criminal investigation, and the company's executives were now facing federal charges. "Your words that day at the cemetery gave us the strength to fight," the letter said. "We named our daughter Hope, because that's what you gave us. Hope that justice is possible." As I finished reading their letter in my small apartment in Portland, surrounded by photographs of Marcus and mementos from our life together, I realized something important. The gift I'd given Vincent Torres hadn't just been revenge, it had been accountability. And accountability, it turned out, was a gift that kept on giving. The construction industry was safer because Vincent Torres was in prison. Families were protected because corrupt officials had been exposed. Young engineers were learning to build with integrity because Marcus's memory lived on in scholarship programs and safety protocols. Vincent Torres had tried to erase Marcus's legacy, but in the end, he'd only made it stronger. The company Marcus built may have been destroyed, but the principles he believed in were now embedded in an entire industry. That night, I dreamed about Marcus one more time. We were standing together on a construction site, watching workers install safety equipment and follow proper protocols. The building rising before us was solid, well-built, designed to last. "You did good, Rebecca," Marcus said in the dream. "You built something that matters." When I woke up, I was smiling. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly at peace. The gift I'd left for Vincent Torres had destroyed his criminal empire. But in doing so, it had built something much more valuable, a legacy of integrity that would protect families for generations to come. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's making sure the right thing finally wins. 5 years after Vincent's sentencing, I thought the chapter of my life involving the Torres family was permanently closed. I was wrong. Sometimes the past has a way of demanding one final confrontation, and mine came in the form of an unexpected phone call on a rainy Thursday morning in Portland. "Is this Rebecca Torres?" The voice was young, uncertain, with a slight tremor that suggested nervousness. "This is Rebecca. Who's calling?" "My name is Derek Torres. I was Vincent Torres's son. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you. It's important, Derek." The younger twin, the one who'd always seemed less comfortable with his father's political maneuvering. I hadn't heard from either of Vincent's sons since the sentencing hearing 5 years earlier. "What do you want to talk about, Derek?" "My father is dying. Cancer. The doctors say he has maybe 6 months left. He's been asking for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Vincent Torres, the man who had stolen my husband's legacy and endangered countless lives, was dying in federal prison. My first instinct was to hang up the phone. Whatever Vincent wanted to say to me, I didn't want to hear it. "Rebecca, are you still there?" "I'm here, but I'm not interested in giving your father the absolution he's looking for." "It's not about absolution," Derek said quickly. "There's something he needs to tell you. Something about Marcus. Something he's never told anyone, not even the FBI." That caught my attention. "What about Marcus?" "I can't explain it over the phone. But my father says it changes everything about what happened. He says you deserve to know the truth before he dies." 3 days later, I found myself on a plane to Arizona, flying toward a conversation I'd never wanted to have. Derek had arranged for me to visit Vincent at the Federal Medical Center in Phoenix, where he'd been transferred from regular prison due to his deteriorating health. The facility looked more like a hospital than a prison, which I suppose it was in many ways. Derek met me in the parking lot, and I was struck by how much he'd changed. The confident young man I remembered from Marcus's funeral had been replaced by someone who looked older, warier, marked by the weight of his family's disgrace. "Thank you for coming," Derek said as we walked toward the entrance. "I know this can't be easy for you. Why did you change your name?" I asked. "Janet Morrison told me that both you and your brother had legally changed your surnames." Derek's face flushed with shame. "Would you want to go through life as Vincent Torres's son?" "Cameron moved to Seattle and became Cameron Walsh. He took our mother's maiden name. I went to Denver and became Derek Mitchell. We both wanted to disappear from what our parents had done." The visiting room was sterile and depressing, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. When Vincent was wheeled in, I barely recognized him. The silver-haired politician who had once commanded every room he entered was gone. In his place was a frail man in a wheelchair, his skin gray and papery, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets. "Rebecca." His voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, studying the man who had caused me so much pain. "Derek says you have something to tell me about Marcus." "What is it?" Vincent's hands shook, as he reached for a manila envelope on the table beside his wheelchair. "Before I tell you, I need you to understand something. I never meant for Marcus to die. That was never part of any plan." "What are you talking about?" "The construction accident that killed Marcus. It wasn't an accident." The room seemed to tilt around me. "What do you mean it wasn't an accident?" Vincent opened the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a stack of photographs and documents. Marcus had figured out what I was doing. The kickbacks, the substandard materials, all of it. He'd hired a private investigator and had been building a case against me for months. He slid the first photograph across the table. It showed Marcus meeting with a man I didn't recognize in what appeared to be a restaurant. "This is Marcus meeting with FBI agent Thomas Rowe 3 days before he died. Marcus was going to turn me in, Rebecca. He was going to destroy everything we'd built together." I stared at the photograph, my mind reeling. "Marcus never said anything to me about meeting with the FBI, because he was protecting you. He knew that if the investigation went public, you'd be caught in the middle. He was trying to find a way to expose my crimes without destroying the company or hurting you." Vincent pulled out another document, a report from the private investigator Marcus had hired. The same investigator whose report I'd found after Marcus's death, detailing Linda's fraud scheme. But this report was different, more comprehensive, documenting not just Linda's crimes, but Vincent's entire network of corruption. "Marcus had everything," Vincent continued. "Bank records, recorded conversations, witness statements. He could have sent me to prison for the rest of my life. So you killed him." The words came out flat, emotionless. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching someone else have this conversation. Not directly, but I arranged for the accident. Vincent's admission hung in the air between us like poison gas. Derek, who had been standing silently behind his father's wheelchair, made a sound that might have been a sob. "How?" I asked. "The construction site where Marcus died. He wasn't supposed to be there that day. I called him, told him there were problems with the foundation work that needed his immediate attention. I knew the site supervisor was one of my people, someone who could be trusted to look the other way." Vincent pulled out construction site photographs showing the area where Marcus had been killed. The crane operator was paid to have an accident when Marcus arrived. The load was supposed to fall near him, scare him, maybe injure him enough to keep him from meeting with the FBI. It wasn't supposed to kill him. But it did kill him. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. The operator panicked. Instead of dropping the load near Marcus, he lost control completely. The steel beams fell directly on top of him. Marcus died instantly. The room was spinning now. Everything I thought I knew about Marcus's death was a lie. It hadn't been a random accident, a cruel twist of fate. It had been murder, orchestrated by his own brother. The crane operator, I managed to ask. Dead, car accident 2 weeks later. I didn't order that, but the people I was working with thought he was a liability. Vincent reached across the table and tried to touch my hand. I jerked away from him like he was radioactive. "Rebecca, I need you to understand. I never wanted Marcus to die. I loved my brother. I couldn't let him destroy everything. The business, the family, all the people who depended on us for jobs. I thought I could scare him into backing down. You murdered my husband because he was going to expose your crimes." The words came out cold, factual. It was supposed to be an accident that would put him in the hospital for a few weeks. Just long enough for me to clean things up, maybe convince him that we could handle the problems internally without involving the FBI. Derek finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Dad, how could you live with this? How could you stand there at Uncle Marcus's funeral, comfort Rebecca, pretend to grieve, knowing what you'd done?" Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "Every day for the past 5 years, I've wished I could take it back. Every night in that cell, I see Marcus's face. I hear his voice. Cancer isn't punishment enough for what I did." I stood up from the table, my legs unsteady. "Why are you telling me this now? What's the point?" "Because there's more evidence. Evidence I never turned over to the FBI. Financial records that show exactly who else was involved in the corruption network. Bank accounts in offshore jurisdictions that are still active. Names of city officials and contractors who are still operating, still cutting corners, still putting people at risk." Vincent gestured to the envelope. Everything is in there. Account numbers, shell company documentation, recorded conversations I made as insurance policies. I kept it all as leverage, but now I just want to make sure Marcus's death meant something. His death already means something. The investigation you triggered saved lives. But it didn't get everyone. There are still people out there doing what I did, getting away with it, because they learned to be more careful. This evidence could shut down corruption networks in 4 states. I looked at the envelope, understanding what Vincent was offering me. One final gift, not to me, but to Marcus's memory. The chance to complete the work Marcus had started, to expose every criminal he'd been investigating when Vincent had him killed. There's something else, Vincent said. The life insurance policy on Marcus. The one that paid you $5 million. I'm the one who suggested Marcus increase the coverage amount 2 months before he died. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I told him that with the business growing, he needed more life insurance to protect you if something happened to him. I even recommended the insurance agent. I made Marcus pay for his own assassination. Derek was crying openly now, and even Vincent had tears streaming down his gaunt cheeks. The insurance money, the evidence in this envelope, the contacts I can give you, it's all yours, Rebecca. Do with it what you think Marcus would have wanted. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. Inside were the tools to bring down an entire network of corruption, to complete the investigation that had cost Marcus his life. But holding it also meant accepting the horrible truth about how my husband had really died. Will you testify to all of this? Will you admit publicly that you orchestrated Marcus's murder? Vincent nodded weakly. I'll tell the FBI everything. I'll plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. I know it won't bring Marcus back, and I know it can't undo the pain I've caused you, but maybe it will help you find some kind of peace.
Peace.
I laughed bitterly. Vincent, you've just told me that my husband's death wasn't a tragic accident. You've told me that the man I trusted as family murdered the person I loved most in the world. What part of that is supposed to give me peace? The part where you get to finish what Marcus started, the part where his investigation finally gets completed, where all the criminals get caught, where no other families have to go through what you've been through. I looked at Derek, who was staring at his father with a mixture of horror and disgust. Did you know? Did you have any idea what he'd done? No, Derek said immediately. Neither Cameron nor I knew anything about Uncle Marcus's murder. We thought it really was just an accident. If I had known, I would have gone to the police myself. Vincent reached out weakly toward his son. Derek, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I've done to this family. For the shame I've brought on you and your brother. Derek stepped back from his father's reach. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. You're not my father anymore. You're just a murderer. Derek, please. No, you killed Uncle Marcus. You destroyed Mom's life. You turned Cameron and me into the sons of a killer. There's no forgiveness for that. Derek turned to me. Rebecca, whatever you decide to do with that evidence, you have my full support. If you need me to testify, if you need me to go public with what I know, I'll do it. My father needs to pay for what he did to Marcus. 3 hours later, I walked out of the Federal Medical Center, carrying an envelope that contained enough evidence to destroy what remained of several criminal enterprises. But I also carried something else, the knowledge that Marcus's death hadn't been God's will or random bad luck. It had been a cold-blooded murder. Derek drove me back to the airport in silence. As we pulled up to the departure terminal, he finally spoke. Rebecca, I want you to know that Cameron and I loved Uncle Marcus too. He was more of a father to us than our actual father ever was. If we had known what Vincent had done, I know, Derek, this isn't your fault. You and Cameron are victims too. What are you going to do with the evidence? I looked at the envelope in my lap. I'm going to finish what Marcus started. Every name in here, every criminal your father protected, they're all going down. Good, Derek said fiercely. Make them all pay. As my plane lifted off from Phoenix, I stared down at the sprawling city below and thought about Marcus. He'd died trying to do the right thing, trying to expose corruption that was putting innocent people at risk. Now I had the chance to complete his mission, to ensure that his murder would result in justice for everyone he'd been trying to protect. The gift Vincent had given me wasn't forgiveness or peace. It was the truth, and with it, the power to make sure Marcus's death finally meant something more than personal tragedy. By the time the plane landed in Portland, I had made my decision. The war wasn't over. it was just beginning. The flight back to Portland felt like it lasted forever. I sat in seat 14A, clutching Vincent's envelope, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd learned. Marcus hadn't died in a random accident. He'd been murdered by his own brother to prevent him from exposing a criminal conspiracy. The grief I thought I'd processed, the acceptance I thought I'd found, all of it crumbled in the face of this new horrible truth. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I spread Vincent's evidence across my dining room table like pieces of a massive evil puzzle. Bank records showing payments to city officials I'd never heard of. Photographs of meetings between Vincent and contractors in parking lots and restaurants. Audio recordings of conversations where safety inspections were being bought and sold like commodities. But the most damning piece of evidence was a handwritten journal that Vincent had apparently kept for years, documenting every bribe, every corner cut, every dangerous decision made in the name of profit. The entry dated 3 days before Marcus's death made my blood run cold. Marcus knows everything. The private investigator has recordings of me and Kellner, FBI meetings scheduled for Monday, can't let him destroy 20 years of work. Tony says the crane operator at the Riverside site owes him a favor. Accidents during inspection visits could buy time to clean up loose ends, just needs to look realistic. My husband had been executed based on a journal entry, a cold calculation that his life was worth less than protecting Vincent's criminal empire. I called Agent Mills at 2 a.m., not caring that I was waking her up. "Rebecca, what's wrong? I need to see you immediately." "Vincent Torres just confessed to murdering Marcus." There was a long pause. "What did you just say?" "Vincent arranged Marcus's death. It wasn't an accident. I have evidence, documents, recordings, a written confession. He's dying, and he wants to clear his conscience." Jesus Christ. "Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm in my apartment in Portland. Agent Mills, this goes much deeper than we thought. Vincent kept records of an entire corruption network that's still operating. We're talking about ongoing criminal enterprises in 4 states. Don't touch anything else in that envelope. I'm catching the first flight to Portland. We'll go through everything together, but Rebecca, if Vincent really confessed to murdering Marcus, this just became a federal murder case." Agent Mills arrived the next evening with 2 other FBI agents and a prosecutor from the Justice Department. They spent 6 hours going through Vincent's evidence, photographing every document, analyzing every recording, cross-referencing names and dates with existing investigations. "This is incredible," said Agent Sarah Foster, the prosecutor. "Vincent Torres essentially documented a multi-state racketeering operation. We're looking at RICO charges for at least 30 people, maybe more." "What about Vincent's confession to Marcus's murder?" I asked. "That's the priority. We'll be charging Vincent with conspiracy to commit murder, but given his condition, we need to move fast. He might not live long enough to stand trial." Agent Mills looked up from the journal she'd been reading. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared to testify about what Vincent told you? This is going to require you to relive Marcus's death in excruciating detail." I thought about Marcus, about the investigation he'd died trying to complete, about all the other potential victims who were still at risk from the criminals Vincent had protected. "I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure justice is served." 2 weeks later, I was back in Arizona, but this time I wasn't alone. Agent Mills accompanied me to the Federal Medical Center, along with a court reporter and Vincent's own attorney, who had advised his client to cooperate fully in hopes of avoiding the death penalty. Vincent looked even worse than he had during our first meeting. The cancer was progressing rapidly, and the doctors estimated he had perhaps 2 months left to live. Millions of dollars in taxpayer money had been stolen through inflated contracts and kickback schemes. But the most satisfying arrest came when Robert Kellner, the city councilman who had started the whole corruption chain 25 years earlier, was taken into custody at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport as he attempted to flee to Mexico with 2 suitcases full of cash. Kellner was the keystone of this entire operation. Agent Mills explained to me during one of our regular briefings. Vincent's confession gave us enough evidence to trace every bribe, every rigged contract, every safety violation back to Kellner's office. Without Vincent's records, Kellner would have gotten away with it. The trials began 8 months later, and I testified in 11 different cases over the course of 2 years. Each time I walked into a courtroom, I carried with me a photograph of Marcus that Derek Torres had given me. A picture of Marcus at a construction site, wearing his hard hat and safety vest, reviewing blueprints with the same careful attention to detail that had eventually gotten him killed. The first trial was Robert Kellner's, and it was the most satisfying. Kellner had grown arrogant over the years, convinced that his network of corruption was untouchable. When he took the witness stand in his own defense, he actually tried to blame Marcus for the whole conspiracy. Marcus Torres knew exactly what was going on, Kellner testified. He was getting rich off these contracts just like everyone else. This whole story about him being some kind of whistleblower is nonsense designed to make his widow look sympathetic. That's when the prosecutor played Vincent's recorded confession for the jury, including the part where Vincent detailed how Marcus had been planning to expose the entire operation to the FBI. If Marcus Torres was part of this conspiracy, the prosecutor asked Kellner, why would Vincent Torres have had him killed to prevent him from talking to federal agents? Kellner's face went white. He had no answer. The jury convicted Kellner on all counts: racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, money laundering, and accessory to murder. Judge Patricia Chen, the same judge who had sentenced Vincent, gave Kellner 35 years in federal prison. Mr. Kellner, Judge Chen said at sentencing, your greed and corruption directly led to the murder of an innocent man who was trying to do the right thing. Marcus Torres died because he threatened your criminal enterprise. That makes you as responsible for his death as the man who arranged it. One by one, the other defendants fell like dominoes. Linda Torres, who had been cooperating with investigators in hopes of avoiding prison time, received 5 years for money laundering and tax evasion. The crane operator who had taken Vincent's money to cause the accident was already dead, but his family received immunity in exchange for providing evidence about the conspiracy. The most emotional trial was that of building inspector Carlos Mendoza, who had been taking bribes to overlook safety violations for over 15 years. During his sentencing hearing, the family of a construction worker who had been killed in a building collapse in 2017 confronted him directly. My husband died because you were too greedy to do your job, said Maria Santos, the widow of Roberto Santos, who had been crushed when a poorly constructed wall collapsed. You took money to approve work that you knew was dangerous, and my children grew up without their father because of your corruption. Mendoza was sentenced to 22 years in prison, and the judge ordered him to pay full restitution to the Santos family and 12 other families who had lost loved ones in accidents caused by his negligence. But the most important outcome of Operation Foundation wasn't the prison sentences or the financial restitution. It was the systematic reform of construction safety practices across the country. The Torres protocols that had started in Phoenix were now federal law, requiring multiple independent inspections for any major construction project and creating severe criminal penalties for safety violations. 3 years after Vincent's confession, I received a letter from Isabella Rodriguez, one of the recipients of the Marcus Torres Memorial Scholarship. She had just graduated from Caltech with a degree in structural engineering, and her first job was with a government agency that monitored construction safety compliance. Mrs. Torres, she wrote, I want you to know that every building I inspect, every safety protocol I enforce, I do it in memory of your husband. Marcus Torres died trying to protect people from exactly the kind of corruption I'm now trained to detect and prevent. His legacy lives on in every life that's saved by proper construction practices. The letter made me cry, but they were good tears, healing tears. 5 years after Vincent's death, I stood once again at Marcus's grave in Riverside Memorial Gardens. But this time, I wasn't alone. Derek Torres was with me, along with Maria Gonzalez and 15 former Torres Construction Solutions employees, who had all found success in their new jobs. Uncle Marcus would be proud of what you've accomplished, Derek said, as we stood around Marcus's headstone. You didn't just get justice for his murder, you completed the work he died trying to do. Maria placed a wreath next to Marcus's grave, one with a banner that read Marcus Torres, Builder of Integrity. Rebecca, I have something to tell you. Gonzalez Construction Solutions just won the contract to build the new Marcus Torres Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles. It's going to house the FBI field office that's responsible for investigating construction corruption. The irony was perfect. Marcus's name would be on a federal building, designed to prevent exactly the kind of crimes that had gotten him killed. As we prepared to leave the cemetery, I noticed a young man standing at a nearby grave, crying quietly. He looked to be in his early 20s, and he was holding what appeared to be a construction worker's hard hat. I walked over to him. "Are you okay?" He looked up, his eyes red with tears. "My dad worked construction. He died in an accident last year because his company was cutting corners on safety equipment. I keep thinking that if someone had been watching out for workers like my dad, he might still be alive." "What was your father's name?" "David Morrison. He was working on a hotel project in San Francisco when a scaffolding system collapsed. The company was using substandard materials to save money." I felt that familiar surge of anger at hearing about another life lost to corporate greed. "David, my name is Rebecca Torres. My husband was killed by people who cared more about profit than human lives, but we fought back, and we won. If you want to fight for your father's memory, I can help you." 6 months later, David Morrison was enrolled in the Marcus Torres Memorial Scholarship Program, studying construction safety engineering. His father's death had triggered another federal investigation that resulted in 3 more executives going to prison for criminal negligence. The cycle continued. Each victim who stood up, each family who fought for justice, each corrupt official who got exposed made the system a little bit safer for everyone else. Standing in my apartment in Portland 7 years after Marcus's death, surrounded by newspaper clippings documenting the dozens of criminal convictions that had resulted from Vincent's confession, I finally understood what the real gift had been. It wasn't the revenge I'd gotten against Vincent Torres. It wasn't even the justice we'd achieved for Marcus's murder. The real gift was the knowledge that Marcus's death had ultimately saved countless other lives, that his investigation had grown into a movement that was still protecting families across the country. Vincent Torres had tried to steal Marcus's legacy, but in the end he'd only made it immortal. Every building constructed with proper safety protocols, every inspection conducted with integrity, every corrupt official sent to prison was part of Marcus's continuing legacy. I kept one final memento from the whole ordeal, the last letter Vincent Torres had written before his death, addressed to me but never sent. Derek had found it among his father's personal effects and decided I should have it. "Rebecca," the letter read, "I know there is no forgiveness for what I did to Marcus, and I'm not asking for any. But I want you to know that in his final moments, your husband was still trying to protect you. When I called him to lure him to the construction site, he asked me to promise that if anything happened to him, I would take care of him. Even facing his own death, Marcus was thinking about your welfare. He loved you more than his own life, and he died a hero trying to save others from people like me. I hope that someday you can remember him for the good man he was, rather than for the evil that took him away." As I finished reading Vincent's letter, I realized something important. I had forgiven Marcus for not telling me about the FBI investigation. He had been trying to protect me, just as he'd always done. And in the end, his sacrifice had protected not just me, but thousands of other people who would never know his name but whose lives were safer because of his courage. The gift I'd left for Vincent Torres had been justice. But the gift Marcus had left for the world was something far more valuable, a legacy of integrity that would outlive us all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's making sure that good ultimately triumphs over evil, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. Marcus Torres was gone, but his fight for safety and honesty in construction would continue forever. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful gift of all. 10 years after Vincent's confession, I received a phone call that would change my life one final time. The caller was Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Dean of Engineering at Stanford University, and she had a proposition that Marcus would have found irresistible. "Mrs. Torres, Stanford is establishing a new research institute focused on construction safety and ethical business practices in the engineering field. The Board of Trustees has voted unanimously to name it the Marcus Torres Institute for Ethical Engineering. We'd like you to serve as the founding director." I was sitting in my office at Portland General Hospital, where I'd been working as head of quality assurance for the past 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd moved from ensuring the safety of buildings to ensuring the safety of patients, but the core mission remained the same: protecting people from preventable harm. "Dr. Harper, I'm flattered, but I'm not an engineer. I'm a nurse, You're also the person who exposed the largest construction corruption scandal in American history. You understand better than anyone how good intentions can be corrupted by greed, and how ordinary people can fight back against institutional corruption. That's exactly the perspective we need. The Marcus Torres Institute would be different from traditional engineering programs. Students wouldn't just learn how to design and build structures, they'd also study the ethical implications of their work, the human cost of cutting corners, and the responsibility that comes with holding people's lives in your hands. We want to graduate engineers who think like Marcus Torres thought, Dr. Harper explained. People who understand that their first obligation is to the safety and welfare of the public, not to corporate profits or political convenience. I accepted the position 6 months later, after negotiating to split my time between Stanford and Portland General Hospital. I wasn't ready to completely leave nursing behind, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to shape a new generation of engineers who would carry Marcus's values into the future. The Institute's first class of students arrived in September 2031. 24 brilliant young people from around the world who had chosen Stanford specifically because of the program's focus on ethical engineering. Among them was Jennifer Kellner, the daughter of Robert Kellner, the corrupt city councilman, whose crimes had started the chain of events that led to Marcus's murder. Jennifer was nothing like her father. She was quiet, serious, driven by a need to atone for her family's crimes. During her admissions interview, she'd told me, "I grew up knowing that my father was responsible for people dying in unsafe buildings. I want to spend my career making up for what he did." On the first day of classes, I stood before those 24 students in a lecture hall that bore Marcus's name, looking out at faces full of hope and determination. Behind me was a large photograph of Marcus at a construction site, surrounded by workers, all of them wearing proper safety equipment. How many of you chose engineering because you want to build something that will outlast your own lifetime? I asked. Every hand in the room went up. Good. But here's what I want you to understand from day one. The most important thing you'll ever build isn't a bridge or a skyscraper or a hospital. The most important thing you'll build is your own integrity. Because without that, everything else you create is worthless. I told them Marcus's story, not the sanitized version that had appeared in textbooks, but the real story of a man who had built a business based on honesty and hard work, only to watch his own brother corrupt it from within. I told them about the investigation that had cost Marcus his life, and about the ongoing fight to ensure that construction safety remained a priority, rather than an afterthought. Marcus Torres died because he believed that people's lives mattered more than profit margins, I concluded. Every building you design, every project you manage, every decision you make, will be a choice between following his example or following the path that leads to corruption and tragedy. The students took the lesson to heart. Jennifer Kellner became the class's unofficial leader, organizing study groups and volunteer projects that focused on improving construction practices in low-income communities. David Morrison, the young man I'd met at his father's grave, was now a graduate student serving as a teaching assistant, helping undergraduates understand the real-world consequences of the engineering decisions they would someday make. But the most remarkable student was Carlos Valdez, the nephew of Jimmy Valdez, the crane operator who had killed Marcus on Vincent's orders. Carlos had grown up knowing that his uncle had been involved in a murder, and he'd dedicated his life to honoring the memory of the man his family had helped destroy. "Professor Torres," Carlos said, after one particularly intense seminar on construction site safety, "I need you to know that my family has never stopped feeling guilty about what my uncle did. We've talked about it for years, wondering if there was some way to make amends. Carlos, you're not responsible for your uncle's actions. You were a child when Marcus died. But I can still honor his memory. That's why I'm here, why I'm studying engineering. I want to build things the way Marcus Torres would have built them, safely, honestly, with respect for human life." Carlos's senior project was a revolutionary new crane safety system that used GPS tracking and automated controls to prevent the kind of accident that had killed Marcus. The system included multiple fail-safes and required constant communication between the crane operator and ground supervisors, making it virtually impossible for someone to cause a deliberate accident. "I call it the Torres Safety Protocol," Carlos explained during his project presentation. "It's designed to prevent anyone from ever using construction equipment as a weapon." The presentation brought tears to my eyes. Here was the nephew of Marcus's killer, dedicating his career to preventing similar tragedies. It was redemption and justice and healing all wrapped into one brilliant piece of engineering. The Institute's second major initiative was the Marcus Torres Whistleblower Protection Program, designed to help construction workers and engineers report safety violations without fear of retaliation. The program provided legal support, financial assistance, and career counseling for people who risked their livelihoods to speak out against dangerous practices. Our first major case involved a whistleblower named Patricia Liu, a structural engineer, who had discovered that her company was systematically falsifying earthquake safety reports for buildings in Los Angeles. Patricia's supervisor had ordered her to approve buildings that didn't meet seismic safety standards, and when she refused, she was fired and blacklisted from other engineering firms. They told me I'd never work as an engineer again if I went public with what I knew, Patricia explained during our first meeting. But I keep thinking about what happened to Marcus Torres. He died trying to expose this kind of corruption. How can I stay silent when I have the chance to prevent other people from getting hurt? The Institute's legal team helped Patricia file complaints with both the FBI and the California Licensing Board. Her evidence led to a criminal investigation that revealed systemic fraud at 3 major engineering firms, all of them cutting corners on earthquake safety to increase their profit margins. The case made national headlines when it was revealed that over 200 buildings in Los Angeles County were potentially unsafe in the event of a major earthquake. The buildings included schools, hospitals, and affordable housing complexes, all places where the most vulnerable members of society would be at risk. This is exactly what Marcus Torres died trying to prevent, Agent Mills told reporters during a press conference announcing the arrests. When engineers prioritize profits over public safety, people die. The Marcus Torres Institute has given us the tools to identify and prosecute this kind of corruption before it leads to tragedy. Patricia Liu received a settlement of $2.8 million for wrongful termination and became the Institute's first visiting fellow in ethical engineering. Her case study became required reading for engineering students across the country. But the Institute's most ambitious project was the Global Construction Safety Database, a comprehensive registry of building practices, safety violations, and corruption cases from around the world. The database allowed engineers, regulators, and law enforcement agencies to share information about dangerous practices and the people who promoted them. If Vincent Torres had tried to start his corruption scheme today, he would have been caught within months, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, who had left her job in Phoenix to become the Institute's associate director. The database creates a global network of accountability that makes it almost impossible for corrupt practices to spread from one jurisdiction to another. The database's most important feature was its Marcus Torres alert system, which automatically flagged any construction project involving people or companies with a history of safety violations. When a flagged project was identified, local authorities and safety advocates were immediately notified, allowing them to increase oversight and prevent corners from being cut. 5 years after the Institute's founding, we received validation that our work was making a difference. The National Institute for Construction Safety released a report showing that building-related fatalities had decreased by 37% since the Marcus Torres Institute began operating. More importantly, the number of corruption cases being reported and prosecuted had increased by over 200%, suggesting that the culture of silence that had protected people like Vincent Torres was finally breaking down. We're not just training better engineers, I explained to a gathering of construction industry leaders. We're changing the entire culture of the construction industry. We're creating a world where speaking up about safety concerns is seen as heroic rather than troublesome, where doing the right thing is rewarded rather than punished. The industry leaders were receptive to our message, partly because they'd seen what happened to companies that ignored safety and ethical concerns. VT Development Corporation had been completely dismantled, its assets sold to pay restitution to victims. Linda Torres, now 72 years old, was working as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit in Arizona, still paying off her share of the damages. Cameron and Derek Torres had both built successful careers under their adopted names, but they remained strong supporters of the Institute's mission. Our father destroyed our family's reputation, but Rebecca Torres rebuilt it into something honorable, Derek said, during a speech at the Institute's 5th anniversary celebration. The Torres name now stands for integrity instead of corruption, for protection instead of exploitation. That's a legacy worth preserving. The celebration was held in the Marcus Torres Memorial Auditorium at Stanford, with over 500 attendees including former construction workers, FBI agents, prosecutors, and engineering students from around the world. The keynote address was delivered by Miguel Herrera, the safety inspector who had recorded Vincent's bribery attempts and whose courage had helped expose the entire conspiracy. Marcus Torres never got to see the impact of his investigation, Miguel said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. But if he could see us today, engineers from 6 continents gathered to discuss construction safety, students dedicating their careers to protecting human life, technologies being developed to prevent corruption, I think he would be proud. After the formal celebration, I found myself standing alone in the Institute's memorial garden, a quiet space behind the main building where we'd planted 24 trees in honor of people who had died in construction accidents caused by corruption and negligence. Marcus's tree was an oak, chosen because oaks represent strength and endurance, qualities that perfectly captured his character. "You did it, didn't you?" I said quietly to his tree. "You changed the world." The voice that answered me wasn't Marcus's, it was my own, but it carried his conviction, his determination, his absolute commitment to doing what was right, regardless of the personal cost. "We did it together," I said, "and we're not finished yet." As I prepared to leave the garden, I noticed a young woman sitting on one of the benches, reading what appeared to be a textbook on structural engineering. She was one of the Institute's new students, probably preparing for an exam. "Working late?" I asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh, Professor Torres, I didn't see you there." "Yes, I have a test tomorrow on load-bearing calculations. I want to make sure I understand everything perfectly. What's your name?" "Amanda Richardson. I'm named after the journalist who helped expose the Torres construction corruption scandal. My parents said she was a hero for helping bring justice to Marcus Torres." Amanda Richardson, the daughter of the investigative reporter who had helped me destroy Vincent's criminal empire. Now she was studying to become an engineer, trained in the principles that Marcus had died defending. "What made you choose engineering, Amanda?" "I grew up hearing stories about your husband, about how he tried to do the right thing even when it was dangerous. I want to build things that make the world safer, the way he did. I figure the best way to honor his memory is to make sure the things I design will never hurt anyone." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the ripple effects of everything that had happened since Marcus's death. Vincent's attempt to steal Marcus's legacy had instead amplified it beyond anything we could have imagined. The corruption he'd tried to hide had been exposed on a global scale. The silence he'd tried to maintain had been replaced by a culture of transparency and accountability. Most importantly, Marcus's belief that construction should serve humanity rather than exploit it had become the foundation of a new generation of engineers who would carry that principle into the future. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek Torres. "Rebecca just wanted you to know that Cameron and I have decided to legally change our names back to Torres. We're proud to share a name with Marcus now, and we want our children to grow up knowing they're part of a family that stands for integrity." I smiled as I typed my response. Marcus would be honored. Welcome back to the family. The next morning, I woke up in my Portland apartment and realized something remarkable. For the first time in over a decade, I felt completely at peace. Marcus was gone, and nothing would ever bring him back. But his death had prevented countless other tragedies, his investigation had saved thousands of lives, and his principles were now being taught to engineers around the world. Vincent Torres had thought he could steal Marcus's legacy by destroying his company and silencing his voice. Instead, he had created something far more powerful, a global movement dedicated to the idea that construction should protect human life rather than endanger it. As I prepared for another day of classes at the Institute, I looked at the framed photograph on my desk, Marcus and me at the groundbreaking ceremony for our first major project, both of us muddy and exhausted but radiantly happy. We had no idea that our little construction company would eventually become the catalyst for reforming an entire industry. "Thank you," I whispered to the photographer. "Thank you for showing me that doing the right thing is always worth the cost." The gift I'd left for Vincent Torres had been justice, but the gift Marcus had left for the world, and for me, was the knowledge that one person's integrity can change everything, that standing up for what's right can create ripples that spread across decades and continents. Marcus Torres was gone, but his legacy was just beginning. And I had the privilege of spending the rest of my life making sure that legacy continued to grow, one ethical engineer at a time. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's transforming their crimes into catalysts for positive change, ensuring that their attempts at corruption ultimately make the world a better, safer place for everyone. Marcus would have liked that kind of revenge. It was exactly the kind of thing he would have built himself, strong, enduring, and designed to protect people for generations to come. 2 years later, the Institute faced its greatest challenge yet. A massive earthquake struck Southern California, measuring 7.2 on the Richter scale, the kind of catastrophic event that construction engineers spend their careers preparing for. As emergency responders rushed to assess the damage, the world watched to see whether decades of safety reforms would hold up under nature's ultimate test. The results were remarkable. While older buildings suffered significant damage, every structure built according to the Torres safety protocols remained standing. More importantly, not a single person died in a building collapse, despite the earthquake affecting over 3 million people. "This is what Marcus Torres died for," said California Governor Elena Martinez during a press conference 3 days after the earthquake. "Every life saved by proper construction practices is a testament to his sacrifice and his widow's determination to ensure that sacrifice wasn't in vain." The earthquake's aftermath revealed something else extraordinary. The construction workers who responded to the emergency were almost all graduates of programs influenced by the Marcus Torres Institute. They worked with a level of precision and safety consciousness that impressed even veteran emergency responders. "These young engineers aren't just technically competent," observed Fire Chief Robert Taylor. "They're thinking about human safety in ways I've never seen before. They're not just asking, can we build this, but should we build this, and how can we make it as safe as possible for the people who will use it?" 6 months after the earthquake, I received an invitation that would have seemed impossible 20 years earlier. The International Association of Construction Engineers was holding their annual conference in Los Angeles, and they wanted me to deliver the keynote address on the future of ethical construction practices. The venue was the newly completed Marcus Torres Federal Building, the same building that Maria Gonzalez's company had constructed to house the FBI's Construction Corruption Task Force. Standing on the stage, looking out at over 2,000 engineers from around the world, I felt Marcus's presence more strongly than I had in years. 23 years ago, I began. My husband Marcus Torres started a small construction company with $17 and a dream of building things that would make people's lives better. He never imagined that his death would spark a global movement for construction safety and ethical business practices. I told them about the Institute's latest project, a partnership with the United Nations to establish construction safety standards for developing countries. Too many people in poorer nations were living and working in buildings that wouldn't meet basic safety requirements, not because the technology didn't exist, but because corruption and cost-cutting made dangerous construction profitable. "We're training engineers to work in countries where bribery is commonplace, where safety inspections are routinely ignored, where human life is considered expendable if it interferes with profit margins," I explained. "These engineers will carry Marcus's principles into communities that need them most." The audience's response was overwhelming. By the end of my speech, over 300 engineers had volunteered to participate in the UN program, offering to spend their sabbaticals working in developing countries to establish safer building practices. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. After the conference, I was approached by Maria Santos, the widow of the construction worker who had been killed in the building collapse caused by corrupt Inspector Carlos Mendoza. "Mrs. Torres, I wanted to thank you," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because of what you did, because of the safety protocols that came from your husband's investigation, my son Roberto Jr. is now studying engineering at UC Berkeley. He wants to make buildings safer so no other child has to grow up without their father." That evening, I called Derek Torres to share the day's events. Derek had become one of the Institute's most generous supporters, using his successful consulting business to fund scholarships for students from low-income families. "Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you," Derek said. "I've been in contact with my brother Cameron, and we've made a decision. We want to establish a trust fund in Marcus's name, something that will ensure the Institute continues operating long after we're all gone." "Derek, you don't need to." "Yes, we do. Our father destroyed so much, hurt so many people. This is our chance to make sure something good comes from our family's name. Cameron and I have each committed $5 million to start the trust, and we're working with other donors to build it into something that will support the Institute's work permanently. The Marcus Torres Perpetual Trust was officially established 6 months later, with an initial endowment of over $20 million. The trust would ensure that the Institute could continue operating indefinitely, training ethical engineers and supporting construction safety initiatives around the world. During the trust's dedication ceremony, I was surprised to see Linda Torres in attendance. Vincent's widow had aged dramatically over the years, her hair completely gray, her face lined with the stress of financial struggles and social ostracism. She approached me nervously after the ceremony. "Rebecca, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I needed to come today. I needed to see what Marcus's legacy has become." Linda's voice was barely audible as she continued. "I participated in Vincent's crimes. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I enjoyed the money, the status, the lifestyle. I never thought about the people who might get hurt." She pulled a small envelope from her purse. "This is my Social Security check from last month. It's not much, but I want to donate it to the scholarship fund. It's the least I can do to honor Marcus's memory." The check was for $847, probably a significant portion of Linda's monthly income. I was moved by the gesture, not because of the amount, but because it represented Linda's first real acknowledgement of the harm her family had caused. "Linda, Marcus would have wanted you to keep this money for your own needs," I said gently. "No, he wouldn't," Linda replied firmly. "Marcus always said that people should be held accountable for their actions. This is my accountability. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure some good comes from it." Linda's donation became the seed for a new initiative, the Redemption Scholarship Program, designed for students whose families had been affected by construction corruption, either as victims or as the families of perpetrators. The program was based on the idea that education and ethical training could break cycles of corruption and create positive change. The first redemption scholar was Jennifer Morrison, the daughter of a contractor who had been imprisoned for using substandard concrete in school construction projects. Jennifer had grown up ostracized by her community, carrying the shame of her father's crimes. Now she was studying structural engineering with a focus on educational facility safety. "I want to spend my career making schools safer," Jennifer explained during her scholarship interview. "I want to make sure no child ever has to worry that their classroom might collapse because someone like my father put profit before safety." As the Institute approached its 10th anniversary, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day when Marcus died. The construction industry that had once tolerated corruption and corner cutting had been transformed into one where safety and ethics were paramount concerns. The changes went beyond just building practices. Engineering schools across the country had adopted the Institute's curriculum, ensuring that future engineers would graduate with a deep understanding of their ethical responsibilities. Professional licensing boards had strengthened their oversight procedures, making it much harder for corrupt engineers to maintain their credentials. Most importantly, the culture of silence that had protected people like Vincent Torres had been replaced by a culture of accountability. Construction workers felt empowered to report safety violations without fear of retaliation. Engineers understood that their professional duty to protect public safety took precedence over their loyalty to employers or clients. But perhaps the most satisfying change was personal. I had found a new purpose in life, one that honored Marcus's memory while helping me heal from the trauma of his loss. The Institute had given me a way to channel my grief into something constructive, to ensure that Marcus's death had meaning beyond the personal tragedy it represented. On the 10th anniversary of the Institute's founding, we held a special celebration at the construction site where Marcus had been killed. The site had been transformed into Torres Memorial Park, a public space dedicated to construction workers who had died in preventable accidents. Standing where my husband had died, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by his legacy, I felt a profound sense of completion. Marcus's murder had been meant to silence his voice and protect a criminal conspiracy. Instead, it had amplified his message and created a global movement for construction safety and ethical business practices. The park's centerpiece was a bronze statue of Marcus, depicting him reviewing construction blueprints with a group of workers. At the base of the statue was an inscription that captured the essence of his life and legacy. Marcus Torres, he built with integrity, died for truth, and lives on in every safe structure and ethical decision. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, I noticed a group of children playing on the park's playground equipment. They were laughing and running, completely unaware that they were playing in a place where tragedy had once occurred. Their joy and innocence represented everything Marcus had worked to protect: the idea that people should be able to trust the buildings around them, that safety should never be sacrificed for profit. That evening, I sat in my Portland apartment, looking through photo albums from Marcus's life. There were pictures of our wedding day, images from the early days of Torres Construction Solutions, photographs of construction projects we'd completed together. Each image told part of the story of a man who had believed that work should serve humanity rather than exploit it. But the most meaningful photograph was one I'd discovered recently, hidden in Marcus's old desk at the Institute. It showed him at a construction site, surrounded by a diverse group of workers and engineers, all of them wearing proper safety equipment and working together to solve a complex engineering problem. On the back of the photograph, in Marcus's handwriting, was a note: "This is what construction should look like. People from different backgrounds working together to build something that will make the world better. If something ever happens to me, I hope Rebecca will remember that this was always my real dream." Marcus had gotten his wish: the construction industry he'd dreamed of, one based on collaboration, safety, and mutual respect, was finally becoming reality. And I had been privileged to play a role in making that dream come true. The gift I'd left for Vincent Torres had been justice. But the gift Marcus had left for the world was something far more valuable: a vision of what construction could be when guided by integrity rather than greed, by concern for human welfare rather than pursuit of maximum profit. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that my story wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about transformation. The transformation of personal tragedy into social progress, of criminal conspiracy into ethical reform, of one woman's grief into a global movement for positive change. Marcus Torres had built his last building 23 years ago, but through the Institute, through the engineers we'd trained, through the safety protocols we'd established, he was still building. He was building a safer world, one ethical decision at a time, and that, I knew, was the most beautiful and enduring structure anyone could ever hope to create. 3 years after the park dedication, I received news that would test everything we'd built. A massive construction project in Dubai, a luxury resort complex, had collapsed during its final inspection, killing 12 workers and injuring dozens more. Initial investigations suggested that the tragedy bore all the hallmarks of the corruption we'd spent decades fighting: substandard materials, falsified safety reports, and bribed inspectors. What made this case particularly disturbing was that the lead engineer on the project, Thomas Patterson, was a graduate of a program that claimed to follow the Marcus Torres ethical framework. If someone trained in our principles could still participate in such devastating corruption, it meant our work was far from complete. "Rebecca, we need to go to Dubai," Dr. Harper told me during an emergency meeting at Stanford. "The UAE government has specifically requested that the Marcus Torres Institute investigate this collapse. They want to understand how their oversight systems failed so catastrophically." The flight to Dubai gave me time to process the magnitude of what we were facing. 12 families had lost loved ones because someone had decided that profit margins mattered more than human lives. It was Marcus's story all over again, played out on an international stage. Dubai's skyline was a monument to human ambition, filled with architectural marvels that pushed the boundaries of engineering possibility. But as our taxi drove past construction sites throughout the city, I found myself wondering how many of those gleaming towers had been built with the same corner-cutting mentality that had killed those 12 workers. The collapse site was heartbreaking. The luxury resort that was supposed to have been a symbol of progress and prosperity had become a twisted mass of concrete and steel. Arabic, English, and Hindi voices mixed together as investigators from multiple countries worked to understand what had gone wrong. "Professor Torres," a young woman approached me at the site perimeter. "I'm Fatima Al-Rashid, the lead investigator for the UAE Construction Safety Authority. We've been following the work of your institute for years, and we desperately need your expertise. Fatima walked me through the preliminary findings. The resort's foundation had been constructed using concrete that was only 60% of the required strength. The steel reinforcement bars were below specification grade. Most damning of all, the safety inspections had been systematically falsified over a period of 18 months. The corruption here goes even deeper than what happened in your husband's case, Fatima explained. We're not just talking about one or two corrupt individuals. This involves an entire network of contractors, suppliers, and government officials working together to circumvent safety regulations. Over the next 2 weeks, our investigation uncovered a pattern of corruption that spanned multiple countries and construction projects. Thomas Patterson, the engineer we'd thought was trained in ethical practices, had actually purchased a fraudulent certificate claiming he'd completed our program. He'd never attended a single class or seminar focused on construction ethics. This is exactly why we need global certification standards, I told the international panel of investigators. Anyone can claim they follow ethical construction practices, but without verifiable training and ongoing oversight, those claims are meaningless. The Dubai investigation led to the establishment of the Global Construction Ethics Certification Program, a rigorous system that required engineers to complete verified training in ethical practices and undergo regular recertification. The program included surprise inspections of construction sites, mandatory whistleblower protections, and severe penalties for falsifying safety documents. But the most innovative aspect of the new system was the Marcus Torres blockchain registry, a tamper-proof digital record of every engineer's ethical training, work history, and any violations or commendations they'd received. The blockchain technology made it impossible for corrupt engineers to hide their past or forge credentials. We're creating a permanent record of integrity, explained Dr. James Chen, the computer scientist who designed the system. Every time an engineer makes an ethical choice or reports a safety violation, it gets recorded forever. Every time they participate in corruption or endanger lives, that gets recorded too. Their reputation follows them wherever they go. The registry's first major test came when investigators discovered that Thomas Patterson had been involved in 3 other construction projects with safety violations. The blockchain record allowed authorities to quickly identify every building he'd worked on and prioritize them for emergency inspections. 2 of those buildings, a shopping mall in Qatar and an apartment complex in Bahrain, were found to have structural defects that could have led to catastrophic collapses. Both buildings were evacuated and demolished, preventing what could have been hundreds of deaths. The blockchain registry just paid for itself 1,000 times over, Fatima told me during a video call 6 months after its implementation. We've identified and remediated 17 dangerous buildings across the Gulf states, all because we could track one corrupt engineer's entire career history. The success in the Middle East led to requests for similar programs in other regions. The African Union invited us to establish construction safety protocols for a massive infrastructure development program. The European Union wanted to integrate our blockchain registry with their existing professional licensing systems. South American countries dealing with earthquake risks requested specialized training programs based on our seismic safety protocols. Each new program brought unique challenges and opportunities. In Nigeria, we discovered that traditional building methods actually incorporated many safety principles that modern construction had abandoned in favor of speed and cost savings. Our engineers learned to combine ancient wisdom with modern technology, creating hybrid approaches that were both safer and more culturally appropriate. In Bangladesh, where flooding was a constant threat, we developed innovative foundation techniques that could withstand both seismic activity and extreme weather events. The techniques were first tested on schools and hospitals, ensuring that the most vulnerable populations would be protected first. We're not just exporting American construction standards, I explained to critics who worried about cultural imperialism. We're learning from local expertise and creating solutions that work for specific environments and communities. Marcus always believed that good engineering adapts to local conditions rather than imposing universal solutions. The international expansion of our work brought me into contact with remarkable people who shared Marcus's vision of construction as a force for human betterment. In India, I met Priya Sharma, an engineer who had survived a building collapse as a child and dedicated her career to preventing similar tragedies. In Brazil, I worked with Carlos Mendoza, no relation to the corrupt inspector from our original case, who had developed revolutionary techniques for building earthquake-resistant schools in impoverished communities. But perhaps the most moving encounter was with Ahmed Hassan, a construction worker in Lebanon, who had lost his brother in a building collapse caused by the same kind of corruption that had killed Marcus. Ahmed had taught himself to read architectural plans and had become an unofficial safety inspector for his community, using his phone to document dangerous practices and report them to authorities. "I cannot bring my brother back," Ahmed told me through a translator, "but I can make sure no other family suffers what mine has suffered. Your husband's story gives me strength to continue fighting." Ahmed's dedication inspired us to create the Community Safety Advocate Program, which trained local residents to recognize and report construction safety violations. The program was particularly effective in communities where government oversight was limited or compromised by corruption. The advocates were equipped with smartphone apps that could analyze construction practices using artificial intelligence, automatically flagging potential violations and generating reports that could be submitted to multiple oversight agencies simultaneously. The apps also included anonymous reporting features that protected advocates from retaliation. Within 2 years, community safety advocates had identified over 3,000 safety violations across 47 countries. More importantly, their presence on construction sites had a deterrent effect. Contractors knew they were being watched by trained observers who couldn't be bribed or intimidated. The program's most dramatic success came in the Philippines, where community advocate Maria Santos discovered that a new hospital was being built with substandard concrete. Her report triggered an investigation that revealed a corruption network involving the construction company, the concrete supplier, and 2 government inspectors. If that hospital had been completed with defective concrete, it could have collapsed during the next typhoon, killing hundreds of patients and medical staff, explained Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the Philippines Minister of Public Works. Maria Santos didn't just save lives, she saved an entire community's access to health care. As the Marcus Torres Institute entered its 15th year, I began planning for my own succession. At 72, I was still passionate about the work, but I recognized the importance of ensuring continuity for future generations. The successor I chose surprised many people: Carlos Valdez, the nephew of the crane operator who had killed Marcus. Carlos had evolved from a guilt-ridden young man into one of the most innovative safety engineers of his generation. His crane safety systems were now standard equipment on construction sites worldwide, and his research had prevented countless accidents. "Carlos understands something that many engineers miss," I explained to the Institute's board of directors. "He knows that every safety protocol, every ethical standard, every oversight system exists because real people have died when those protections weren't in place. That knowledge makes him incapable of compromising on safety." Carlos's appointment sent a powerful message about redemption and transformation. Here was someone whose family had participated in Marcus's murder, who had spent his career making amends for that crime, and who was now being entrusted with continuing Marcus's legacy. "I will never be able to undo what my uncle did," Carlos said during his installation ceremony. "But I can spend every day of my career making sure that construction equipment is never again used as a weapon, that workers are never again pressured to participate in dangerous practices, that families never again lose loved ones to preventable accidents." Under Carlos's leadership, the Institute launched its most ambitious project yet, the Global Construction Safety Monitoring System, a network of satellites, sensors, and artificial intelligence that could detect dangerous construction practices in real time and automatically alert authorities. The system used thermal imaging to identify substandard concrete, analyzed structural vibrations to detect potentially dangerous modifications, and monitored worker movements to ensure proper safety protocols were being followed. It was like having a trained safety inspector watching every construction site on Earth 24 hours a day. "This is what Marcus Torres would have built if he'd had access to 21st century technology," Carlos explained during the system's public demonstration. "A way to protect every construction worker, every building occupant, every community from the kind of corruption and negligence that killed him." The monitoring system's first major success came within weeks of its activation. Satellites detected unusual thermal signatures at a dam construction project in Central Asia, suggesting that the concrete being used was not reaching proper curing temperatures. Further investigation revealed that the construction company was using a substandard concrete mixture that would have failed catastrophically within 5 years. The dam served over 2 million people downstream. If it had collapsed, the death toll could have exceeded anything in recorded history. The monitoring system had prevented what might have been the worst construction-related disaster ever. "We just saved more lives than any single engineering project in human history," Carlos told me during a celebration call. Marcus would have been proud. As I prepared to fully retire from active leadership of the Institute, I took one final trip to the places that had shaped my journey. I visited the cemetery where Marcus was buried, the construction site where he'd been killed, the federal courthouse where Vincent had been sentenced, and the Stanford campus where his legacy continued to grow. At each stop, I was reminded of how much had changed since that terrible day when Vincent's greed had cost Marcus his life. The construction industry that had once tolerated corruption was now governed by the most comprehensive safety and ethics protocols in human history. Engineers who had once focused solely on technical challenges now understood their moral obligations to protect human life. Most importantly, the culture of silence that had protected criminals like Vincent Torres had been replaced by a global community of advocates who viewed construction safety as a fundamental human right. My final act as director was to establish the Marcus Torres Emergency Response Fund, a financial resource that could be deployed immediately whenever construction-related disasters occurred anywhere in the world. The fund would provide immediate assistance to victims' families, support for emergency response efforts, and resources for investigating the causes of accidents. "We can't prevent every tragedy," I explained to the fund's initial donors, "but we can make sure that when tragedies do occur, the response is swift, comprehensive, and focused on both helping victims and preventing similar incidents in the future." The fund's first deployment came 6 months after its establishment, when an apartment building collapsed in Turkey due to earthquake damage exacerbated by construction defects. Within hours, Institute teams were on the ground providing assistance to rescue efforts, supporting displaced families, and beginning the investigation that would ultimately lead to stronger seismic safety requirements throughout the region. Standing in my Portland apartment 25 years after Marcus's death, surrounded by photographs documenting our journey from personal tragedy to global transformation, I felt a profound sense of completion. The gift I'd left for Vincent Torres had been intended as revenge, but it had become something far more meaningful, a catalyst for positive change that would protect generations of people Marcus would never meet. The construction industry Marcus had loved, and that had ultimately killed him, had been fundamentally transformed. Engineers now graduated with a deep understanding of their ethical responsibilities. Construction workers felt empowered to report dangerous practices. Communities had tools to protect themselves from negligent builders. Governments had systems to detect and prevent corruption. None of this would bring Marcus back, but it meant that his death had ultimately saved thousands of other lives. His murder had been intended to silence his voice forever, but instead it had amplified his message until it reached every corner of the globe. I thought about the young engineers who were graduating from programs influenced by Marcus's principles, the construction workers who were going home safely because of protocols he'd inspired, the families who were sleeping securely in buildings that met safety standards he'd helped establish. Marcus Torres had built his last physical structure decades ago, but through the Institute, through the engineers we'd trained, through the systems we'd created, he was still building. He was building a safer world, one ethical decision at a time, one prevented tragedy at a time, one saved life at a time, and that legacy would continue long after I was gone, ensuring that Vincent Torres's attempt to destroy Marcus's work had instead made it immortal. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.